delighted to welcome to the Design Notes studio the newly minted, award-winning designer of Batman The Dark Knight Returns board game, also the COO, I believe that's correct, of Catan America, Morgan Dontanville. Morgan, thank you for coming on the show.
Yay! Yeah, I'm the Chief Creative Officer, so that would be CCO.
I do apologise. Yeah, so
you have nothing to apologise for.
Firstly, congratulations on winning an award for the Batman game.
I know, I just saw that. I'm really excited about that. Very exciting.
Does that mean you can retire now?
Yeah, it's pretty much, that's it. Like I've achieved peak gaming.
So my first question, in life we're asked so often to be sort of modest and not brag, but here you can flex your arrogance muscles to as ever much as you want. So my first question is, when did you know that you were good at what you do?
Well, I worked for Mayfair Games for years as their lead developer. So during that time, I really spent a lot of time really breaking down and analyzing what makes a game good, what makes a game fun, what makes it engaging, when it's tedious, when is it great until it isn't, like like the emotional responses and when things hit and when things don't hit. And during that time, I feel like it was just constant training to make sure that I really understood the craft and really the art of how to kind of engage with the audience, have the audience engage with each other, and fuel the fire of fun, if you will.
And so, there are very few sort of college courses teaching board game design specifically. Was that time at Mayfair for you as a designer kind of like being paid to be at college?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I used to be a chef, and I worked underneath a master chef, and I was, other people who I was working with went to culinary school, and I was like, you guys paid a lot of money and I'm just getting the same thing, but I'm getting paid to do it. So yeah, no, absolutely. When I worked at Mayfair, it really kind of like broke me in. It really, like, we were constantly faced with new challenges, and we had a very, very, very tight budget for what you could put a game out on. I mean, I'm talking like $1,000, So, so it was like, how can we take a really successful design that works in a prototype? How can you make it into a real living piece of art and that people are interacting with? And how can you just like keep people involved from beginning to end and excited about it and talking about it and whatnot? So that was, it really was, it was really just like new, constant, exciting ways to approach games. Some games you don't like you're never going to like them, but you try to make them satisfy the needs of the people who are playing it and the kind of game that they want, and try to recreate the fun experience that they're hoping to get out of that design, while still being respectful to the original design ideology or design sense, or what the intention of the original designer's kind of experience would be. And that really kind of put you into this kind of quasi space where you're really considering the audience, you're really considering the designer, and you're trying to make it work as efficiently as possible. But yes,
I'm an actor, and I'm an actor at a certain level that basically, whether I feel artistically satisfied with the project I'm doing is completely by the by. I get offered a job and I do it, essentially. I mean,
right.
You were designing for a company, and you just mentioned, you didn't like some games. How difficult is it to put yourself into the mind of a player for whom it's their kind of game?
Well, I guess it's one of those things that, like, you really have to think about what the intention of the designer is. Like, Is this where are the hot spots? Where are the points of joy? Where is it connecting? What are you doing that's creating decision points for players? Is it important to have a bunch of decisions? Is it important? Like, what's the excitement coming out of a game? It might just be that you're along for the ride, and for me personally, I am more excited to have more decisions, but there are definitely very, very popular games where you just see where it takes you, and that experience is what's fun for people, is just the unexpected quality or the reveal or the twist or whatever, the things that aren't expected. And sometimes, for me, I like to have good story. Sometimes, a game can just be strictly abstract, and you just have to look at the purity of it and deliver the purity of it in the clearest, cleanest way possible. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it is for me, but it does mean that your audience is desiring a certain thing, and you have to figure out what it is they're going to need. A lot of times, I just read a lot of forums about similar types of games that they like, and actually just talk to people about why they like a thing, why they don't like a thing. So that was a real eye opener, and it really educated like the way to approach design for board games for me.
And you've worked as a developer, you've worked as a designer. What are the essential differences between the two disciplines?
Well, control is really the big one. It's like the difference between the little slide puzzles, like the tile puzzles where you can move the tiles around, or a Rubik's Cube where you can move the Rubik's Cube around. But you can also like crack open the Rubik's Cube and take it apart and then put different things, you know what I mean? And then put it back together. Or the slide puzzle, you can take the whole thing apart and put it together, maybe put a different piece of art in or something. Design, you're creating everything. Development, you have to figure out how to move stuff around within the space that you're given. And then like if you're in desperate straits, when you can actually make big changes, like taking a piece out and putting a different piece in and saying, is this what we want to do? Is this how we want to change the focus of the design? Is this a thing that you feel comfortable with as a designer, to have it go in this direction? What is the goal of the game? Is it satisfying that? Then we really have to like it's failing. It could be failing in a certain way, and you bring it to the attention of the designer that something's not working, and then you have to work with the designer directly. Obviously, with a designer, you can just say yes or no, or make your own decisions, or completely come up with stuff. But usually, as a developer, my approach was always to say, like, here are multiple choice ways to kind of solve a problem that we have constantly run into. You as the designer can make choices based on your control. I mean, that's basically where I think the big difference is between design and development.
And you've worked, I'm sure, with designers who are first-time designers. This is the first game they're having published, and you've worked with very renowned people in the industry.
Yeah.
As a developer, how different is the process if you're dealing with a first-time designer as opposed to dealing with someone like Klaus Teuber?
I mean, it really depends on how much they want to have control. If you're dealing with Klaus Teuber, he likes a lot of control, and so it's really just having an open conversation about why I feel the way that I do, why other people are feeling the way that they do, and then present the emotional response to things and whether or not that matters to him. And then say, like, a lot of times I don't, I've tried to step away from even having a multiple choice thing and just say like, here are points of friction, here are points of where things seem like they're going out of control. Here are things that I wish I had more control of. As a player, what is my personal experience like? What is the interaction like? What are other people feeling? Where are they frustrated? And that's that kind of really kind of emotional feedback is what the work that I do with the Toybers. And when it comes to sometimes like we've built up enough trust that if I can make a couple suggestions and be like this might work, but when you deal with someone like Martin Wallace, for example, like he is the opposite, right? Like he's like ideas 80%, get it into your hands and be like, this is the genius of Martin Wallace, this 80%. And you're like, now you can refine it as much as you see fit. And then you go back and forth with him with it and say like, hey, we want to do this, we want to do that. And he would be like, nah, I don't like that, or I do like that. But as long as it gets to a place where, it's mostly happy with it, he's really happy with it, especially after the play testing and everybody seems to be fit with it. And so the thing about Martin Wallace is that he is open to kind of tweaking his ideas and seeing what works and what doesn't work. But the reality is that Martin is filled with amazing ideas. So he's already working on his next 3 games, so he wants to like crank out as many cool ideas as possible. So the refinement of the games he tends to leave to other people. And that's, when I worked on Steam, one of the things that we worked with Alex Yeager pretty heavily. The two of us were really refining the design of Steam from what was Brummy Rails and Age of Steam before into a new design. And then we then, it left, my goal through that whole thing was to create a line of games where we could build off of it with, as a skeleton that we could have lots of expansions for. And so I did all the expansion work on that, and Martin was totally fine with it because he is already on to the next thing, and he knew that it was in good hands and that we were going to take care of the product, and we were, kept him informed of everything that we were doing. And, he got money off of the work that we were doing, and so I'm sure that was fine with him too. So that's, but it was usually with consent from everything that he was doing. So that was, so it really depends on who you're dealing with. Some people really have different approaches anywhere in between, but usually you want to be as communicative as possible. I certainly have worked with different publishing companies over the years where sometimes you turn it in and you never see it again. Like, it's going to be what it is, and they don't talk to you. And once they sign that piece of paper, once it's delivered, then that's like what comes out may or may not have anything to do with what you originally put in. So it's all over the board. It really depends on what a publisher wants to do and what a developer wants to do, and their relationship with the designers.
So, thinking about your game design work, can you give us an overview of your process, sort of from the beginning, the idea, up until, the finished game being on the table that people can play?
Right. Well, my approach generally is, what game do I want to play that doesn't exist? And I play a lot of games, so I often feel like, it'd be cool if this game did this and it doesn't, or another game, seems like it's going to be this, certain kind of game and it isn't. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just that I had preconceived notions about what a game is going to be, and then afterwards I'm like, I really wish it was this other game. And so that's an inspiration for me in a lot of ways to just be like, oh, make the game that I want. And so then I tend to be really theme driven and story driven. And the idea, like, kind of have a conceptual piece for it to create an environment to play around in, and to try to tell a story that's never been told before if possible. And I do really love Euro games. When I first started out, I play war games too and whatnot. But when I first started out, there was such a big division between, kind of dry Euros and thematic games. And my goal when I was first starting, when back when no one else was, not no one else, but fewer other people were doing it, was to kind of create thematic stories, or environments for stories. So, like, I made a game called Spectral Rails where you're a ghost train and you're trying to deliver souls to their destination,
Mm.
and they're kind of lost souls in the world, and you're trying to get them back home. And usually, what happens is I try to come up with a couple cool gimmicks that I haven't really seen anywhere before, and usually it'll be like, with that it would be like, it's a train game, but what if you remove track? So
Mm.
uh, instead of just building track. So there's this construction and deconstruction that's happening as the ether of the train is moving around, and it can interfere with other people, but then it dissipates because it's a part of that story. And then I usually try to come up with a new way to approach movement or economies or whatever. And I try, it's one of the things that, like, I'm inspired by the work that other people do, but I also look at that as counter examples where
Mm.
it's like, oh, if you've done this thing, what is a way that you could have approached that's not that? And that's and then, as I've played a lot of games, and you find a lot of spaces in between design where you're like, oh, it doesn't seem like people have really gone into this world, or this kind of mechanical space. And so, what if hand management was on a table, and you don't and you're working with what you have, but then it's timed and how it comes back. So that's Spectre Rails was doing a lot of that kind of stuff that didn't really exist before, with a lot of, like, pushing and pulling with how much you want to spend versus, like, for power moves. I like a lot of power moves and combos and stuff like
Mm.
that. So then because it feels exciting, and it makes you feel like you're making decisions as you're going. It's like, oh, is this the turn that I stay back? Is this the turn that I go big? Is this the turn that I'm just seeing what happens, um, to read the other players? And so and I like a lot of interactivity. So I like to build a lot of space for people to kind of read the room, and that's that tends to be how my approach is for design. I did a game called Asgard's Chosen, and one of the I looked at a couple games that I really liked a lot of the concepts for, like, this is not to bag on Mare Nostrum, but Mare Nostrum is so cool. It has all these cool elements to it. It has these monsters. You build up everything, and it's so brittle. And
Mm.
when people attack each other, then you're done. You're decimated, and you spend turns trying to build yourself back up again and build yourself back up again. And so, with Asgard's Chosen, I was like, how can you have a war game where you can have exciting, engaging battles with stakes, but you, but then you're not out of the game.
Mm.
Like, if you lose, like, so then I was looking around, and I was really excited about Dominion when it first came out. And at the time, nobody was really playing around with deck builders. I think that at the time, maybe only Ascension was coming out,
Mm.
and Thunderstone, and that was it. And so I was like, what if I made a deck builder war game, and then all the monsters that you get will still be in your deck, and when you kind of But then I was also thinking, well, one of the things that nobody really had done before was like the same kind of deconstruction where you have to make sacrifices all the time to break apart your own infrastructure, your own deck, um, your own position on the board, and that is what gets you victory points. So, and then with a fun little hand management system. So like stuff like that where my approach to the design was really inspired by other people. I'm not saying I'm in I'm not in a bubble, but also just like how can I do something that's really different with some of the ideas that other people have done, and and how can I make that exciting and fun? Uh, there's a Unfortunately, for a while, I was selling a lot of games, and then those companies kept going out of business. So there were a number of games that would have existed in the real world that were really, I don't know, I think pretty innovative in the turn of this last century here.
Mhm.
That's We're all old now, I guess that's true. Um, so the so some of the designs that I was creating, in the early aughts, nothing was really coming out like that. And it's a shame because some of these designs now they feel the weight of their
Mm.
age, but at the time they were really pretty innovative and different. Um, so, sob.
So you just won an award, the Tabletop Gaming Awards in the UK, as we said at the top of the show, for the Batman game. I mean, what's the pressure of designing for an IP like Batman? Because this is something that people really care about.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you know it, but I used to work at DC Comics,
Hmm?
and I used to work in the back group, and so I worked on like Hush. I don't know, that's a pretty big comic,
Hmm? Yeah.
and and so and I worked around. I was in worked in the same office as Dark Knight Returns 2 was coming out. I was seeing it come in and giving feedback on that and whatnot. I wasn't in charge of it, or I'm not saying I am, but I was a part of like the committee when we were all talking about what comes in and talking about what people care about and seeing how people care about it. When you are in DC Comics, you are an advocate for certain characters in the editorial team. So when I
Hmm?
first started out, I worked for the Justice Society and I worked for Spectre. And when other people would use any of those characters, we'd always sit down in conference with each other to say, what's my intention for these characters? How is this going to interfere with what I'm doing? Does this work with how you're doing? And you actually like loan characters to other
Hmm?
groups. So if someone wanted to guest in another thing, you'd have to sit down and talk about like what, whether or not it's okay for them to do that. So you really, working in the back group, I like my I transferred over. I was Green Arrow, Green Lantern, and then Batman Hush, and so it was really all about understanding what was going to happen with Batman, what the Batman character was, what people wanted from him, and I developed a deep love of Batman. I
Hmm?
mean, I had a deep love of Batman anyway, but like I really got to live through it, and so when Daryl came to me and said, "Hey, I have this idea," we were talking about making one-off games uh, for famous graphic novels. We were going to Cryptozoic and saying like, "Hey, would you be interested in doing something like this?" And the person who was uh, the project developer there was like, "Oh yeah, I totally want to do like bookshelf games where you put the
Hmm?
game right by the omnibus." And then so we pitched a bunch of them, uh, and we decided that Dark Knight should be the first one. Now, my feeling about a lot of Batman stories is that the team is really exciting. I love the interaction between all of the different characters in the kind of the Bat family. But Dark Knight Returns is it's a story of Batman. And
Right.
it's not the story of the villains. It's just the story of this guy coming back to protect the city and to kind of the get everything back on the tracks. You know what I mean? Like everything's falling apart, and it's just his singular goal to try to do as best he can to get Gotham back to where he thinks it should be. And uh, and that, with a lot of discussion, was just like, this has to be a solo game.
Right.
And so Daryl and I really kind of took the approach to this, being like, we have to tell the story of the Dark Knight Returns, and we have to have people experience like going through this whole episodic, um, sequence of events. I mean, I hate to make it sound so clinical, but the reality is that people want to go through what happens in the novel and feel like they're recreating the story and feel the same kinds of tensions that are happening within the book. The sense of claustrophobia, the sense that everything's piling up, his body's getting old, his sanity is kind of cracking,
Mm.
the city itself is just kind of being overrun by a number of different forces that you just that all the resources are just kind of like falling apart underneath it, and it's a crumbling infrastructure, and and then how do you recreate that in a game? And we just tried to push towards that same kind of claustrophobia as best as possible. I mean, if you look at a page from Dark Knight Returns, it's just filled with panels and filled with
Mm.
like little talking heads and like television sets, and then there'll be moments of relief where like you get to these big full page splashes and you're like, oh cool, and it's like it feels like a big moment.
Mm.
And it's that kind of push and pull that we wanted to recreate as best as possible within our game design, so that we wouldn't just be creating a recreation of the plot, but also just the same kind of tension and feeling that comes from reading the game, the book. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So I've got two more questions for you. So you're at a convention and you go out in the evening and you're coming back from the loo and you walk past a table of gamers and you hear your name mentioned. So you sidle into the corner and you eavesdrop on their conversation. What do you hope they're saying about you?
First of all, I hope that I made them laugh at least some point or another. um, like, I don't know. I like to be liked. I'm not going to lie. I want to make people happy. I want to have my designs inspire people to do their own cool thing. Ideally, the perfect thing would be, I played one of these designs and I was so excited by it that I wanted to do this other thing. Like that to me would be the greatest feeling in the world. Someone played Dark Knight Returns, and so now they want to design their own solo game.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like that is the best thing that could happen. And I had a weird moment. The I guess it was 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, where students the students at this high school were playing Spectral Rails a lot, and
Mm.
so they wanted to do a play. So they they made like a musical based on the game that was for their school project, and it was like a competition where they're competing against other schools for this thing, and they were just inspired to do this crazy Ghost Train musical based on the game that they played. And like that to me, like if I walk by and someone's like, "Hey, I played Dark Knight Returns. Now I want to play this game. I want to make a new game." Like that's the greatest thing that I could ever hear.
So, last question then.
Okay.
Why is gaming good?
Oh, well, it brings people together. I mean, solo gaming doesn't bring people together, but it is a weird shared experience when people talk
Sure.
about what their solo adventures were like. The the beauty of a table is when everybody's sitting around it, is that there is a safe space in the middle, and that safe space can be a place where rules and concepts and theme and story can transport someone into that place where they can. There's some level of absolute understanding, but there's still a lot of surprises. That there are stakes in the investment that you have in the design, but there are no stakes in life. Like I can completely screw you over and like do horrible things to you, and we're still best friends after it. That that I could that I could share something and we could work together and we could spend hundreds of thousands of doubloons on something together, and it doesn't cost us anything. Like so. There's like the simulation to me is a big part of it. That you get to flex muscles that you don't get to flex. You get to you get to imagine, what environments might be like in certain situations. There's history to it. There's concepts and like weirdly it makes math fun.
Sure.
Like where all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, well, if what is the value of that? And then you could really start thinking about what the value of something is without it being coached in uh, your personal opinions about things. That I could sit around a table with someone who I have political differences with, and we can still have a very um, respectful interaction with each other in a space that doesn't need that necessarily. Um, you know, up to a point. um, so and I just feel like there's there's a lot of just like human interaction that that you experience where you have shared goals, whether or not it's in competition with each other or for a unified experience, unified goals. But there's the idea that we're all working together to do the same thing, and we all agree that this thing that we're sharing with each other is going to be great for us. Equally, you know, uh, even if a game isn't fun in and of itself, I played lots of games that I had a great time with,
Hmm.
just because the people I was with was so much fun. Like I can think of like some of the worst games I've ever played. We're with some of my favorite people, and like I just have deeply fond memories of those things, just because the game was a vehicle for that. So that to me is that's what makes games good for me.
Brilliant. Well, Morgan, if people want to see what you're up to and all of that sort of gubbins, how can they go about doing that?
Daryl and I are actually working on a new game right now, which I guess we can talk about
Ooh.
a little bit. It's for Upper Deck, um, but I mean I can't tell you what the theme is. But it is a new design for Upper Deck. It's not based on a pre-existing design. So Daryl Andrews and I did um, the Batman Dark Knight game together. So we're coming together to do this new project with Upper Deck. So that should be really exciting. Um, and then I have another design that was one of my older designs that got the dust blown off of it and redone and updated. That's about chupacabras eating
Mm.
goats, and that game is kind of like a push and pull bidding game, hand management game where you have three different packs of chupacabras that are all like trying to wrestle like different kinds of goats together, and it's just a really clever kind of uh, in some ways it's like a challenge, a bidding challenging game, maybe kind of like along the lines of condottieri or something like
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
where you're just playing until you don't, and you have hand management and you're trying to figure it out. But there are three different elements that are going on, and then cards can be reversed. So before Scout came out, I had done this years ago, but you turn the cards upside down and then you do different things with the cards that are upside down. So you're playing hand management where you're deciding how you're going to play cards individually from it. Um, and so that's coming out soon. I can't tell you more than that, unfortunately. But and then I have another design that is from a crazy old IP that nobody in their right mind would ever think is maybe worth doing. I don't know, but I love the IP so much, and I found somebody who wants to do this IP. So I can't really talk about it too much, but it's a really weird old IP that people do have affection for. So it's a kind of a goofy, light uh, card trick taking dice game. So we'll see what happens with that. Hopefully, none of those companies go out of business like my other companies. Fingers
Brilliant.
crossed.
Fingers crossed. Brilliant. Well, Morgan Dontanville, thank you for coming on the show and giving over your time.
Oh, it's always a pleasure, Ben. Always a pleasure.